Okay, so this is the second and the last of my contributions to the conference. I'm leaving very early tomorrow morning, unfortunately, at 5:30 from the hotel. And this session is about mobile learning, and primarily about the use of mobile phones in class. Now, when you first mentioned the idea of using mobile phones, I think most people's reactions are vaguely negative, I think, for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's because there's an institutional ban on mobile devices, so people are not allowed to use them. Sometimes it's because they haven't really thought about using them, or they think that maybe they're not the right bits of technology for the classroom. So before I move forward and have a look at some activities and ways that Nikki and I have worked together to integrate mobile learning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to get together, and you can arrange yourselves however you like, but make sure you're talking to one other person and not an imaginary friend, okay? So at least one other person, two or more if you want to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to just brainstorm and have a little think about the pros, the good things about using students' mobile devices in class, and the cons, the potential bad things, okay? And I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes to do that, and then we're going to come together and actually talk about that list, because that's kind of an important part of this talk. So with your partners, have a little chat. Okay, let's stop there. We'll come together as a group. Let's start off with the cons, the potential bad bits of it. What do you think?
Battery charge can run out.
Okay, so there's a very prosaic con. The batteries could run out. What could we do about that? How could we address that?
Get everyone to bring a charger and just an extension socket.
Okay, so we could make sure that for a start that everybody comes in the morning with their device fully charged, which would be good. We could have people bring their chargers with them if we have some power points, sockets. What if you have an if you have an electricity problem, this may not be the talk for you. No, listen, I think actually one of the big advantages of mobile devices is even if you have an electricity problem, you've still got the possibility of doing something. Whereas with many other technologies, if we had an electricity problem here, you wouldn't be looking at my slides now. So in many ways, they're actually better because they do have batteries. You could also perhaps encourage people to save battery life. So things like turning off notifications would be a good thing. And turning off notifications also, I'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so we've got a potential power issue that we may be able to solve just by being organized, I guess. What other cons?
Teenagers may do other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the one that teachers usually mention first, distraction. The thought of teens having their mobile phones out, incredibly distracting. So how could we mitigate that problem? What could we do to minimize the distractions? We could use special apps, but then we'd have to make sure there was an app for every kind of phone, wouldn't we? Apple devices, Android devices. Let's think very carefully about this distraction thing. The first thing is, do you remember I said turn off notifications? That's one way of reducing distractions hugely, because one of the most distracting things, and you know this because I know it too, is when your phone is constantly vibrating or going bing. You think, well, something else more exciting is happening somewhere else. So the first thing, I think, is turn off notifications. Second thing, how can you minimize distractions? Well, the good news is that mobile phones are almost invisible if you ask your students to put them on the desks in front of you, upside down, with the screen facing the desk. There's no distraction then. You can't even see it. Now, if you think about a laptop or a computer, you can't make a laptop or a computer disappear easily, but you can make a mobile phone disappear easily by putting it upside down on a table. That minimises distractions. What else minimises distractions? Well, some of this is not a technology problem. Some of it is a classroom management problem, and some of it is a task design problem, because if you take away people's mobile devices, do you take away their distractions? No, you don't. They just go to other distractions, passing notes under the table, daydreaming, looking out of the window, drawing cartoons. So it's actually, distraction's not a technology problem at all. It's more a problem of how do we keep people engaged and busy so that they're not easily distracted. So one of the things I think with any kind of task is, we all know this, it needs to be carefully planned. There needs to be a time limit and clear instructions. So I want you to do this in the next 5 minutes. When those 5 minutes are over, we're going to do something else. So make sure you've done it. So yes, mobile devices, they do present distractions. So does sitting in class. Sitting in class is a very distracting kind of thing for lots of children and lots of adults, in fact. So, okay, I think we can minimize that. Upside down on the table. Short use of mobile devices. We're not talking about using mobiles for the entire class. Maybe 3 minutes here, 4 minutes there. When they're not being used, they're upside down, notifications off, they've disappeared for a little while. Other cons, other negative points.
This problem, we cannot manage it, especially in overcrowded classes.
You manage it, you mean in terms of making...
We cannot control all students. For instance, I teach 450 students in an amphitheater.
Okay, that's a lot of students.
Yes. How can I control them and assure that they are not using these mobiles?
Well, yes, you can't. But then you can't control them anyway, can you? Because there's 450 of them. There's no solution to that, either technological or non-technological, really. It is an issue, obviously. I mean, it's an issue for all sorts of reasons, not connected to technology. Things like monitoring and giving feedback and all sorts of things. The one thing I might say is perhaps that technology can allow students to do things autonomously in small groups, perhaps, which might give you a little bit more time to help a few people, but those are, I mean, they're astronomical numbers, aren't they? How do you know, that's not a technology problem at all, that's just a problem. The big classes, I think, are problematic with or without technology. They're also incredibly exciting, I think, and can be, incredibly fulfilling. But again, that's a classroom management thing. It's about how you organize the learning and how you organize the tasks, I think. But certainly, I lift my hat, as we say in England, to you. Much respect. Those are big groups, really. And it's hard work. Yes, look, hey, if someone's in the back row, they could turn their notifications on pretty easily without you noticing. What can you do? Nothing, sorry. You could rely on your students to be a bit more responsible. That takes a little bit of time. I'll be talking a little bit about that in a minute. Any other cons?
Some students having problems dealing with technology?
Yes, some students may have problems with technology, but the good news is that most people know how their own phones work. Now, you can't say the same about every other technology, I think. You can't give students laptops and say, do something, because some of them may not be able to do it. But the good news is, and as I look at these activities, I hope it will become clearer, is that most people know how to use their own mobile phone, and that's a big advantage of using their own. And B, it doesn't have to be complicated. The tasks we do don't have to be complicated. I suspect that mobiles are actually better than any other technology for that, because at least we know more or less what our phones do. Okay, well, let's move on to let's leave the doom and gloom behind and move on to some good things. Pros. It's fun. That's a great pro. I mean, fun is actually quite a bad word in education, Yeah, fun, attractive, exciting, motivating, those are all good words.
Saves time and effort.
It can save time and effort, yeah. In terms of, this morning I was talking about looking up vocabulary and things like that. Teaching students how to do that effectively and properly is a great time saver for a teacher. But they do need some teaching. We know that students struggle to use paper dictionaries properly, and it's even more complicated online, so there is some training to be done there. But it can save time. I want to go back to the fun bit. The fun bit is good. The fun, the exciting, the motivation thing, that's all good. It can be quite short-lived. A lot of the research into motivation and technology shows that it can be very motivating, but actually for a fairly short amount of time. And then it becomes normal, which is not to say that that's a bad thing. Actually, normal is probably good. And there's a guy called Stephen Bax, many years ago, he wrote a history of computer-assisted language learning, and he used this term normalization for technology. He said that when technology is normalized, when we're all using it regularly as an integrated part of the class, then it will become invisible and it won't be special anymore. And he said technology is one of the few areas we talk about computer-assisted language learning, but we don't talk about pen-assisted language learning or book-assisted language learning, because those are normalized technologies. They're invisible. We don't see them anymore. Technology, we've always made a little bit special. So I think even if the motivation doesn't stay constant, it's great if it actually settles down into something good and even and natural and normal and normalized within what we do. More pros?
I would say that the challenge is keeping it edutaining.
Yes, there's a word, edutainment. It's not a word I like necessarily, because I don't think anyone's ever done it very well. If you look at the products, the edutainments are kind of not sure. I'd like to see technology playing less of an entertaining part in that respect. Lots of people use technology to distract people, to keep them busy often, and that's perhaps not the best use. But it certainly has to be, I think it does have to be interesting and involving. It has to involve the students, as any bit of learning does. Any other pros, quickly? Yes, sir.
Technology could be exploited creatively. You could like design an activity involving recording videos.
Absolutely. So yesterday in the plenary I was talking about verbs, getting people to do things. Verbs are fantastic. And technology and mobile phones do allow you to create things. I'm going to hopefully show you a couple of those later. So there are all sorts of possibilities for creative uses of technology, and mobile phones are great. They've got a camera and an audio recorder and all sorts of things. Okay, as the lady next door just said, I'm going to move on. She's slightly ahead of me. And I'm going to talk you through how Nikki and I have approached the introduction of mobile learning in education systems. A lot of it's based on this book that Nikki and I wrote. It's called Going Mobile. It has a short theoretical overview and then lots of practical activities. And we started from the point that teachers have spent 2 or 3 years saying, put your mobile away, switch it off, put it in your bag. Sometimes Nikki, I remember 2 summers ago or 3, was teaching in a school in Cambridge, and Nikki was doing a mini kind of research project on mobile learning. So all the people in her class were running around with their mobiles. And the teacher in the class next door had a box with mobiles written on it. And when everybody went to class, they had to put their mobile in the box. And so it is very surprising for people, particularly young kids, teens. They're going to be very surprised. You've 2, 3 years, go put your mobile away, and now you're going, get your mobiles out. So they get a little bit confused, and they don't quite know why they're doing it or what it's for. So in the first chapter of this book, we came up with a set of activities which are, if you like, preparatory activities. So getting people used to the idea of using their mobiles and using them for educational purposes. So it's an awareness raising set of activities. And the idea behind them really is to get people thinking about their mobile phones, thinking about what they do with them, and then thinking about what they might do with them in class or out of class as part of their learning. And one of the first activities we have is a very, very traditional English language teaching activity. It's a find someone who activity. You know the ones? You have a list of things, you have to walk around trying to find someone who can answer yes. And that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to ask you to move around a little bit. It's post-lunch, you're all a bit sleepy, and I would like you to find someone who can say yes to those questions. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to walk around. If you don't want to walk around, talk to the people near you, but that would just be very lazy, and you should walk around because you've just had lunch. This is a very traditional activity. Is there anybody in the room that doesn't have a mobile phone? Okay. Anybody had their phone stolen apart from this gentleman that I was talking to? One. Oh wow, quite a few people. Okay. Any game players here on phones? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Anybody got a really old phone with no camera?
Yes.
You still have a phone with no camera? You look so happy about it. Brilliant. Do you have more than one phone? Ah. That doesn't count. Sorry. Okay, so look, we've got a very traditional activity here, but it serves many purposes at the beginning of a term or a year when you're going to use mobile phones. What does it do? Well, actually, what happens with students mostly is they get their phones out and they start saying, oh, this is my phone. And so you can see, well, maybe not with 450 people, but in smaller classes, you can see what people have, the kind of devices they have, and you can find out, if you listen carefully, you can find out a little bit more about what they do with them and when they use them, and you can find out pretty much what's available to you, what's coming into your class, which is a great thing to know. You'll see at the bottom that Nikki and I slipped in a little question at the end, find someone who has used a phone in class before. And this was just a way really of introducing the topic of mobiles in class. So after that, you can move on to look at various things. You could move on to, for example, think about what mobile devices do. So you can do text, you can do audio recordings, you can take photographs, and brainstorm with the students what they think they could do with them in class. So, okay, if you can take photographs, what could you do with those photographs that would be useful for you in your education? And to go back to the whole distraction thing, working towards an agreement really with the learners. That was a little bit about with the large classes, which might work, is to develop what's known as an acceptable use policy, an AUP, acceptable use policy, which is kind of like a contract between you and the students saying, these are the good things to do with mobile devices in class, these are the not so good things, so if we could stay on the good side, that would be very helpful. So that's a kind of way of just kind of introducing the idea of mobiles in class. And we have in that chapter there are lots of other similar activities talking about people's habits and what they do on social media and that kind of thing. And then we move forward, and each time we add in a little element. So the next element we add in is looking at text on mobile devices. What can you do with text on mobile devices? Well, you can take notes, for example. If you're teaching language, you might want to do a dictation, and instead of people writing it down, they could type it down. You can keep a record of vocabulary that you learn on your mobile phone or your tablet. But you can also, and I alluded to this briefly yesterday in the plenary, you can perhaps think about new genres and new types of text. Instant messaging. You know, how does that work? What does it look like? Email. There's a very famous piece of text which I'll show you now very briefly, but I have to give you a little bit of history. The piece of text I'm going to show you comes from 2003, okay, 13 years ago, which is like prehistoric times in terms of technology. Yeah. So at the end of the summer in the UK, early September, kids go back to school. And what's the first thing the teacher does?
Right, sorry, but your summer holidays.
Excellent, sir. Yes, that's happened to you, hasn't it? Yes. So the first thing teachers do is say, well, we're all going to write about what we did on our summer holidays, because it gives the teacher an extra day of summer holiday while everyone's writing what they did on their summer holidays. So this was in Scotland. In 2003, a 14-year-old girl gave this text to her teacher about what she'd done on her summer holidays. I'm going to give you a minute and a half to see how much you can read and understand. Okay, look, I won't have you sitting here forever, but I will very quickly read the text for you. It says, "My summer holidays were a complete waste of time. Before, we used to go to New York to see my brother, his girlfriend, and their 3 screaming kids. But my parents were so upset because of 9/11 that they decided to stay in Scotland and spend 2 weeks up north. Up north, what you see is what you get. Nothing. I was very, very, very bored in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but sheep. Meh. That's the sound they make in English. Nothing but sheep and mountains. Mountains. At any rate, my parents were happy. They said it could be worse, and that they were happy for the peace and quiet. Idiots. I wanted to go home as soon as possible to see my mates again. Today I came back to school. I feel very saintly. She's got a halo above her head. Very saintly, because I've done all my homework. Now it's business as usual." Now this is a complex piece of text, but it's a fun piece of text. And with advanced groups, it's quite fun to see how much they can work out and how they work it out. And David Crystal, one of our foremost grammarians, did a book on text English. And he made one interesting point, he made lots of interesting points. No, I won't detract from his book. But one of the points was, he said, if you want to write summer as S-M-M-R, you kind of have to know that really it's S-U-M-M-E-R. So you're just playing with the language, which is a great thing to do. But this can lead us into all sorts of discussions about new genres and into looking at emails, instant messaging, all sorts of other things, Skype conversations, Facebook. What does English look like on Facebook? Pretty bad, I'd say. But then I'm an old person. The great thing about this story, when it was handed in to the teacher was horrified. She said, within 10 years, nobody will speak English ever again. I think they said the same thing 30 years ago when the pocket calculator appeared. You know, nobody will ever do maths again. The story was on the BBC. Then it was on international news. It went around the world. It was very famous, millions of hits on the internet. You can't find it anymore, really. It's quite tricky to find these days. And the reason is, it never happened. It was an invention of an English teacher. There was no student. Which leads me back to yesterday's talk about information literacy. Before you start sharing this kind of thing with people, you really need to make sure whether it's real or not. Okay, we're going to move on and look at images. One of the great things about mobile devices is they pretty much, apart from your second phone or third phone, they all have a camera in them. So they can take photographs. What can we do with photographs? I'm going to share one of the activities that Nikki and I came up with for the book. It's an activity which asks people to show photographs on their mobile device to other people. Now, if I was doing this with a group of students, I would tell them what photographs I wanted, and I would ask them to prepare and bring them in. And I am going to ask you to share your photographs, which means you're going to have to go find one and then share it, okay? So be very careful what you share. There are very strict instructions. What I'd like you to do, as far as possible, is share these photos, okay? Examples of these photos, and just find out a little bit more about why the person took that photo, what it means to them, who it is, or what it is, where it is, what they were wearing, what they ate. Going to give you, again, 4 minutes or so, 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, so this is kind of like when you have a new class, maybe a week 2 activity or something. So they already know a little bit about each other, the names and where they live, that kind of thing. But this gives people a little bit more information about the people that they're sitting near and they're working with. Good things about this activity, well, everybody, pretty much everybody in the world loves showing their own photos to somebody else, okay? We do it incessantly. We bore people when we come back from our holidays, don't we? We say, I've only got 800 photos. Shouldn't take too long. But we like taking photographs, we like sharing our photographs. It's a very personal thing. This is an activity that can inspire an awful lot of conversation, lots of chat. Most people have these kinds of photographs on their phones. You might have to adapt the activity for your students, maybe change some of the categories, but these are fairly common categories pretty much anywhere. So this is an activity which I think you can use in all sorts of contexts, taking photographs and sharing photographs. So I just want to tell you about one resource which I think is a great resource for teachers in terms of using photographs, which is a resource called ELT Pics, P-I-C-S, ELT P-I-C-S, ELT Pics. And this is a collection of photographs taken by teachers all around the world. There are 28,000 photographs taken by English teachers. They're all royalty free, so you can use them in your own materials and in your own classes. And if you have a look at eltpics.com, you'll find a link to the Flickr site where these 28,000 photographs are. And there are some fabulous photographs. They're divided by themes, so things like food and drink, transport, phrasal verbs, abstract nouns, all sorts of things. Really, really great content, I think. Okay, I'm just going to pause there, and in your little groups, what I'd like you to do is just to go back and think about what we've just looked at, which is text and images, and have a think about some other things you might do with those particular things, with the text facilities of a mobile device or with the image, the photo camera of a mobile device. I'm going to give you 2 minutes in your group to see if you can come up with at least one idea. That would be great. Okay, so would anybody like to share an idea? You were deeply in conversation over there. Anything that was it a monologue? What were you talking about?
We did the thing of, from a typical course book, you'll have lexical sets like, food or clothing or rooms of the house or furniture and then so you do the vocabulary work in class, maybe for homework you give the students a list, take a picture of 10 of these items, any 10 at home. So if it's food from your fridge or from your home, next class, show each other and use the vocabulary in a real communicative way, not just showing their examples.
Yeah, I mean, I think great for collecting vocabulary, actually. Cameras, really good for collecting vocabulary. So all those kind of things, most of the course books that people work with are theme-based. Each unit has a theme. And often, I think, a traditional approach might be to present the vocabulary at the beginning of the unit, the vocabulary of the theme. And this flipped version, which Nikki came up with on this summer course I was talking about, is to get people to bring the vocabulary with them at the beginning. So next week we're going to be talking about, transport. So between now and Monday, take 5 photographs connected with transport. And you probably get a lot of obvious ones. You'll get lots of cars and buses, but you might get something unusual. You might get a tricycle or whatever, a train maybe, whatever. So all that vocabulary comes into class. But the great thing about all that is I think that not only are they collecting the vocabulary, which means that they have a big investment in the vocabulary, but they're also taking photographs, and people get very competitive about taking photographs. So they'll take a little bit of time, they might take the photograph 3 or 4 times. But all the time they're doing that, they've got the item of vocabulary in their head. Yeah? So it's just sitting there while they're framing their shot and deleting it and taking another one. And you can do this regularly. This is not an exercise that only happens once. You can keep doing this. And you can do even more with that, because the vocabulary then, just to go back to ELT Pics, you could open a Flickr account and have your students uploading their photographs to Flickr and tagging those photographs with translations or example sentences and that kind of thing. And the great thing about that is an electronic dictionary that they created that travels with them, as opposed to a paper-based one in class, which is stuck in class. This one goes everywhere. There's a great British Council app called My Word Book, which is free. And My Word Book allows you to create your own graphical dictionary. So you can input new words, you can do the part of speech, translation, definition. You can take a photograph to illustrate the vocabulary item, but you can also record it as well. You can get an audio recording or get your teacher to do an audio recording for you. So I think cameras are great at allowing students to bring things from outside into class. And actually that's one of the great things about mobile learning, is that they make a much more obvious connection between what happens in the class to what happens out of class, because the learning moves backwards and forwards with people, audio or video or pictures. We then move on, after we've looked at text and images, we move on to look at audio. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Was anybody in my workshop this morning? Yes. Okay, so in my workshop this morning, I was explaining how having students record themselves is a really good idea. It's good practice. It gives them a chance to practice their spoken English in a safe environment where they're not being scrutinized or judged, where the class isn't waiting for them to say something. So giving students a chance to record themselves regularly and listen to themselves is good. One of the activities we have is a very simple activity which we borrowed from a colleague of ours, Paul Driver, and his activity is very simple. He says he asks the students to imagine that they're aliens. They've just landed on planet Earth, and they can understand what things do, but they don't know the names for any of those things. So when they're on the way home from school, they have to they find an object in the street and they have to describe it. They make an audio recording on their phone describing the object, but they don't know the name of it. And I always remember one of the great examples he had, it was a parking meter, you know, where you put money into the parking meter. And this person said it's a metal monster in the street, and occasionally people come up and feed it other bits of metal to keep it happy. And so lots of ideas. We've got a very boring example here, which is a piece of stationery. But it doesn't have to be a long recording. It doesn't have to be a complex recording particularly. But it's a great thing to get students into the habit of hearing themselves, because we know, don't we, when you speak another language, you sometimes you find listening to yourself a little bit uncomfortable. So the more you do it, actually, the better it gets. How long have I got? 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes. That's good, because I'm going to finish in 5. So basically, we keep increasing the complexity of what we're doing on the mobile devices, and that's how we kind of train students, if you like, to use them. But I'll tell you one thing at the moment, we haven't used anything smartphone so far, none of this. Any of those activities will work on a phone 10 years old, if the 10 years old phone is still working. And we haven't used any internet connection either. So all of those activities are kind of low resource, ones that you could do anywhere, really. Video's a little bit different in many ways. I'm going to show you 2 bits of video. They're both produced at a school where my wife was working in the south of England. It's a private language school where people come from all over the world, so you have very mixed nationality classes. The first one is a piece of video with 3 young boys, I think probably about 15 or so. And they were asked by the teacher to record a video with a specific purpose, and it was a pronunciation and an intonation. Now, it's not perfect intonation, this activity. They found a poem. It's called People Will Always Need People. And they produced a video which illustrates the poem. And it's a combination of images and bits of video that they filmed. I'm going to show you a little bit of it. It's not, it's not going to win an Oscar, this film, okay? But it's a very nice little piece of film. Let's see if it works.
People need people. People need to walk, to talk, to cry and piano. People will always need people. To love and to miss, to hug and to kiss. It's useful to have other people, to whom you will know you are alone. It's so hard to share when no one's there. There's not much to do when there's no one but you. People will always need people.
To breathe, to breathe, to put you at ease. People will always need people. To make life appealing and give life some meaning. It's useful to have other people. If you need a change, to whom will you turn? If you need a lesson, from who will you learn? If you need to play.
But a lot of work went into that video, a lot of planning, a lot of discussion about what was going into the video, what was going to be filmed, what images they were going to use. Like I say, it's not a masterpiece, it's not going to win an Oscar, but it's a beautiful piece of work that 3 students worked on together for a long time, speaking English, collaborating to make this final version. The next one I'm going to show you comes from the same school, and it was made using a smartphone. It was made using an iPad, using iMovie, which is a piece of software for making video. But in iMovie, there's a specific genre of video you can make, which is a movie trailer. And they're very, very easy to do. You can teach someone how to make one in 5 minutes. I'm going to show you one made there. I just need to turn it down a little bit because it's quite loud. Let's see. Nice piece of work, isn't it? Beautifully made because the software allows you to make that. No technical skill required. I could teach you all to make one in 20 minutes. The hard work, of course, comes before that. There's a lot of work. This was a set of 3 or 4 classes looking at movies, looking at movie genres, looking at what makes a good movie trailer. What are the features of a movie trailer that make you want to go and see the movie? And then they drew a storyboard, what was going to happen, who was going to film it, where they were going to film it, how it was all going to fit together. There's no English in the finished product, apart from text, obviously, but a lot of work went into the planning. So, but the end product's fabulous. And of course, they're kids, they're all away from home, a long way away from home. This was shared on YouTube. Their parents, back in Spain, in this case, were able to see the work that their kids were doing, that they'd paid so much money for them to do. So, lots of good reasons for doing that kind of thing. So the video camera is a fabulous thing for collecting video. I'm going to stop in a minute. The one thing we haven't mentioned, and I really don't want to spend time on it, is, apart from iMovie, is we haven't mentioned apps. And I haven't mentioned apps for many reasons. But the first is that apps can be quite complicated in terms of management. So if you're asking students to use their own phones, you're going to have some Android phones, maybe Maybe you know someone who, a couple of kids with an iPhone, then there'll be maybe an old Nokia and a Samsung. And apps then are quite complicated because sometimes you can't get an app for all of those systems. Sometimes it's only for one. So apps, I think, complicate the life of a teacher. But I think what hopefully we've seen is that the inbuilt affordances of any phone, the text, the camera, the video, those allow you to do things without the need for internet access, without the need for apps, and without those complications. Everyone knows how to use the camera on their phone. Everybody knows how to take notes on their phone. These things are really easy to do. Anyway, listen, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.